What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and it's time for patch 11.9 for League of Legends. This is the patch for the mid-season invitational, and thus with it, we have some buffs and nerfs specifically for pro play. Most of the nerfs have already been done by now, but some of the buffs are pro only. I say that because they are not buffs that are needed for solo queue. These are champions who are already successful. They don't need to be any stronger, and Riot's buffing them anyway because they want a more varied metagame for the mid-season invitational. I don't have a strong opinion on that idea right now. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, but to be clear, this seems to be objectively a thing they are trying to do, is debuff things that don't need buffs for solo queue, but pros aren't giving them a fair shake. Now, I've talked about this before in videos and on Reddit and stuff like that, that pros are always, to some degree, slow at picking up the right champions. We can look at Worlds last year with New Urgot, where New Urgot was available for a very, very long time in his full powered state, and only at Worlds was he 100% pick and ban. And there were weeks or months on end beforehand where he was never played. This kind of thing happens frequently. It is not every single champion. The pros are not, 100% wrong on every champ they ever pick, but there are always some champions left over that they just didn't think about and aren't playing. Sometimes buff like these will put them into play. Sometimes it's not enough, and we'll see. Sometimes champions get weaker than they were before the buffs, and pros are still playing them. This has happened with things like Caitlyn before. Anyway, patch 11.9 is a follow-up on 11.8 with some of the jungle champion buffs, and again, it's the MSI patch, so let's get into it. Yes, indeed. Nerfs to Diana because she's OP basically everywhere. Nerfs to Mundo top, Garen top, Gragas in flex role, though you notice that he's not actually OP anywhere. His win rates are actually fine, but I think Riot's worried he's going to overtake pro. Hecarim, yep, obviously. Heimerdinger, overall too high of a win rate in every elo. Jinx, too high of a win rate in every elo. They found a bug. Morgana, too good of a jungler. Rumble and Vladimir were Riot tried to buff Rumble and Vlad for top lane, so I actually, I saw a Reddit post about XD, why are Riot, undoing some of these Vlad buffs, whatever, but the goal was that, Vlad and Rumble were essentially non-viable as top laners, but were, got way too good in the mid lane. And so, they were walking back the Vladimir buffs as much as they can to try to make the balance state pretty decent while still giving Vlad top something. And in the Rumble case, it's like, well, it was a pretty big change list, so they have to walk back something. And then otherwise, as we can see here, right, buffs to all these champions that you can all understand about. Item changes, Dead Man's is a nerf, Death Dance is a buff, Moonstone's a buff, Chem Tank's a nerf, Wit's End is a strict buff. None of these are reshapes anyway, they're just strict changes. So, yep, Diana is certainly doing too well. Now, Diana Jungle is about 1.5% lower win rate than Diana Middle, but both are very, very strong. Diana Middle is definitely gigabusted. Probably the single strongest champion of the game is Diana Mid, so one you should definitely play a lot of. And what's interesting is, so they are nerfing her armor scaling, and this, by the way, yeah, this is her base health regen. So armor scaling, it doesn't really affect jungle very much. I mean, it doesn't really affect any of her lane matchups because it's going to, happen down the line. But it does disproportionately affect lanes that are getting more XP, which, mid lane gets more XP than jungle, so it's a good nerf that's aimed at mid more than jungle, so a scaling nerf makes sense. Base health regen means way more in mid lane than it does in the jungle, because honestly, Diana's gonna be full health clearing her jungle anyway because of all the omnivamp, so these are pretty good nerfs in terms of, shaping mid lane down and not hitting jungle that hard. The other part of this is a half revert of the passive buff from the previous patch. Indeed, Diana was already a pretty good mid laner, and this, in the previous patch was a strict buff. So, yeah, Diana mid definitely overtook things. I'm a really big fan of the follow-up change list. This is a good job by Riot of doing an instant, patch. Again, half revert here, some nerfs there. And again, keep in mind, right, Diana jungle is in fact lower win rate than Diana mid. So anything that, drops all win rates sort of fairly equally. This is, again, a little bit jungle focused. And then this is mid lane focused to put them a bit closer together. Pretty good change list. Here is overall Diana's armor before and after. Going down to 84 armor is reasonably low for a melee champion. So she does have, fairly low armor overall for a champion. That's fine. Diana is more assassin than heavy fighter. Certainly, a mix of some, but she has a targeted dash and then she presses all her buttons at once to burst you. It's a fairly assassin-y combat pattern. Not, full Fizz style, Again, she can't get out, so she wants some level of durability, which her W provides. But yeah, she is fairly squishy for a melee champion who gets in there. As far as the health regen overall, I always like to do health regen in terms of health per minute because it's a little bit easier to kind of understand the numbers. And yeah, she's getting 6 less health per minion wave. That adds up eventually. This certainly can matter. Keep in mind that you're going to be laning for maybe 3 or 4 minutes for your first recall in some cases. Yeah, it's 40 health or so. If you saw a base health nerf of 40, you'd be like, wow, that's a pretty big nerf. Functionally, this is not that far apart from that, right? You're losing 12 health per minute, assuming you're taking damage at any point in time. Yeah, sure, it feels about right for that. So somewhat meaningful. Next up is Dr. Mundo, who is certainly doing too well also. Riot did a really good job at reshaping the champion. So much so that he went from a 48% top laner to a 53% top laner, which is a 5% win rate gain, which is a ton. Obviously, he's now overpowered. And the jungle went from basically 53 to 51.5. So, they basically found a way to, indeed buff Top Mundo, nerf Jungle Mundo slightly because Jungle Mundo was OP and Top Mundo was trash. Now, Jungle Mundo is good and Top Mundo is OP, right? So it's okay, well, now that Top Mundo is doing slightly too well, much like the Diana changes, we can do scaling nerfs, which are going to disproportionately affect top lane, any solo lane in general. So indeed, 0.5 armor growth, 0.5 AD growth. Indeed is going to be a bit of a hit there. So here's Dr. Mundo, his armor before and after, 87. Obviously not much higher than 84. In fact, his overall armor growth lower than Diana's. His base armor is higher, whatever. But yeah, again, for a Juggernaut kind of champion, he doesn't have that much armor. 87 is pretty average, all things considered. Obviously, going to build tank items, and the base stats of tanks aren't really that important when you're, fiddling over, 7 armor or something. But yeah, still, a nominal durability decrease, it's going to matter. And then the attack damage going down. I mean, honestly, 112 is fairly low for a melee auto attacker. But that said, Mundo has his E, which gives him a bunch of flat AD, even more if he's lower on health. So yeah, honestly, it seems reasonable. I think I don't think Mundo's going to be a spot where he's going to be weak next patch. Mundo jungle might maybe dip sub 50, but Mundo top's going to be fine. So seems reasonable. Next up, we have Garen, who is doing too well, apparently mostly in high elo, or sorry, in low elo. What's interesting is this is a nerf that I guess it depends how you slice this. Okay, so the nerf basically is the max cap of bonus armor MR from the W passive from lasting minions is unchanged, but it gets there much more slowly, right? It gets there 150 CS instead of 120 CS. So obviously up until you hit 150 CS, it's a nerf to the champion. The amount that it's a nerf is arguably, well, the math's kind of weird, right? Because the more armor and MR you have, the less that like 5 armor matters for, this change basically, at a random breakpoint. So, if you're last hitting really slowly and you're leveling up more, and you're like level 7 by the time you get 30 CS or whatever, because you're really, really not last hitting well, the difference in armor MR is not that big of a deal. Conversely, you still have a difference for a lot longer if you're a lower elo player because you still have less than you would have had. On the other side, though, a 30 CS requirement difference, though, when it's actually, the full stat cap difference, you're going to accelerate to that difference earlier as you're better. Then obviously once you have CS, you're just the full champion again. Whatever, kind of thinking about how much of a nerf it is somewhere versus somewhere else is kind of a tough one to get around. Overall, though, Garen is like 2.8% win rate over baseline. So yeah, reasonable nerf. So next up we have, and just double checking, we don't have anything here. So Gragas is theoretically a triple flex. The pick rate across the 3 roles of jungle, top, and support are all pretty close together actually. And for what it's worth though, Gragas is a completely average jungler, and at least for solo queue win rate, a below average top and support. That said, I think Riot's like, look, we nerfed a bunch of other champions. We're nerfing Hecarim again. We nerfed Udyr. We're nerfing Chemtank. We're doing all these things. We're, nerfing some of the top laners we think might get overplayed. There were some more Thresh nerfs in there as well. And I think they're worried about Gragas being 100% pick ban at MSI this patch as a triple flex of jungle top support. And I think that's reasonable. Again, Gragas does not need nerfs from solo queue. I think they are nerfing him preemptively for pro. Again, how you feel about that is going to be up to you. I'm not sure myself, but that seems to be the goal here. Indeed, yeah. Triple threat and pro levels of prey, pro levels of play. So yes, indeed. So ultimately, they're nerfing Body Slam, nerfing it by 0 to 20 base damage. Which, if we look at Gragas jungle, and probably for most roles, he's something he maxes second. I think in a lot of top lane matchups, you can max this first, which means it's an even bigger nerf to Gragas top. Because he's going to feel this change much earlier. But for Gragas jungle, he's not really losing any clear speed here. Though still, obviously, he will at some point hit level 8 in the jungle, and that's going to be less damage, and it's going to be a nerf. Ultimately, Gragas doesn't really seem very good for solo queue. Probably don't play him any. Oh well, it is what it is. Next up, we have Hecarim. Hecarim is getting some pretty big changes here. So, base armor down by 4, armor growth up by 0.25, means it takes 16 level ups to meet that. So, level 17 or 18 Hecarim is finally a buff, but until then, it's going to be weaker. So, objectively lower durability. The Q damage now doesn't amp nearly as fast. You need 100 bonus AD for the Q damage to ramp up at the same speed. If you don't know how Hecarim Q works, his first Q does full damage, the next one does 105% damage, the next one does 110% damage. So basically, if he's playing a longer fight, he's doing 10% more damage out of his Q. Well, now that's 2 or 4% more damage out of his Q, but the more bonus AD you get, the better it goes. Now, of course, you're going to have stat shards, so you're going to have some bonus AD automatically at level 1. He converts bonus move speed into AD, so there's even more bonus AD from there, but not 100 bonus AD. The current builds and the highest win rate builds are full tank. That said, though, looking at Hecarim in solo queue right now, the Trinity Force builds on Hecarim are only about 0.6% win rate lower than Turbo Kempnik. Now, there is a bias here in this data, because it is possible to lose so badly you don't even get to buy your mythic item. This happens to some degree, and if you're quibbling over like a 1% win rate, yeah, in 1% of games you lose so badly you don't finish a mythic. That can happen. But Turbo Chem Tank costs like 700 less gold than Trinity Force. It's like 2,600 versus 3,333. So that is a really big deal. If there was going to be a game where you had to surrender at 18 minutes, you might have surrendered with a Chem Tank. You might not have surrendered with a Trinity Force, meaning Trinity Force could never have received that loss because it was never bought. Stat sites don't really understand that you're halfway to the item. They shouldn't anyway. So Trinity Forces, just by being a more expensive item, is going to have an inflated win rate when you're trying to scrape solo queue data. Just by the way, that's just going to be a thing. So this is one of those cases where you see the 0.6% win rate difference and you're like, is it really? And it's probably not. It's probably not more than 1.5%, but certainly, to be clear, even after the last set of Chem Tank nerfs, Chem Tank Hecarim is still the strongest Hecarim. And Riot's like, Hecarim is not meant to be a tank, he's meant to be a fighter. Let's incentivize that. I think it's great. I think saying no, Hecarim is not a tank is a totally reasonable like design choice to make, and I support that personally. Like I'm in favor of that kind of change. So once again, requires 100 bonus AD for the Q to be the same. This is going to be, by the way, an early clear nerf. It can't not be. Now the healing for the W is 30% for damage that you deal, but every 100 bonus AD is another 2.5%. I mean, even at an endgame build, you're getting maybe 200 bonus AD, and that's like a full build fighter. So, this being 35% selfish healing is not exactly a lot. So it's not meh, but keep in mind that the jungle healing is capped, and you 1.1 W for a very long time, meaning this change doesn't affect your jungle healing in any way at all. But if you consider half the damage comes from him and half the damage comes from a teammate, it is half as good for teammate damage. And this will never catch up, right? Like this is going to be, 17.5% or something like that. And this is 35% for you. This is, in all cases, always a nerf. Hecarim is always going to heal for less, except maybe in some instances of top Hecarim, because you do kind of build fighter for top Hecarim. Top Hecarim is going to be slightly better because he's going to do more of the selfish healing. That's there, kind of. But yeah, so this is a nerf. This is eventually a buff, but again, it's a nerf to clear speed and it's early dueling in top lane. This is a nerf for the first 17 levels of the game, and devastating charge is losing 5 to 45 damage at minimum, and 10 to 90 damage at maximum. This is a really large change list Hecarim. So here's the armor difference, right? Take 3% more damage in the early game. Eventually, at level 18, it's better. Again, right, we can see, right, very brawly frontline champions, have 100 something armor, right? Like we compared Diana to earlier and we compared Dr. Muda to earlier. Hecarim just goes up to 100 armor at level 18. This is part of why. So I believe this is true, and I could be wrong. I'm gonna take a quick aside here. This is Hecarim, by the way. We're just gonna do this real quick. So I'm gonna take a quick aside here and talk about the base stats real quick. My belief and my understanding is that base stats do a half decent job of reinforcing the intended playstyle. Um, so even though, let's say I have 2,000 health versus 3,000 health. No one has that kind of difference, but let's just pretend. Okay, I guess Scion and Shogath do, but let's move on. Well, okay, I'll just say it this way, right? Right, the more armor you have, the more direct value bonus health gives, right? If I have 100 armor versus, 83 armor, 87 armor, I'm going to get like, let's call it 10% or so more value out of health. It's just going to go 10% farther. And that's basically true. There's ways you could slice the data to try to make it not true, and there's a debate there, kind of. But realistically, the higher your base stats, the better your complementary base stats are. Even when both are higher, right? If Hecarim has very high health and very high armor, even though you already have high health, this don't necessarily need more health, and already have very high armor, that don't necessarily need more armor. The high armor still makes you want to buy more health, and high health still makes you want to buy more armor. That still tends to be generally true. And so Hecarim is in a base stat spot where his base stats reinforce him building tank because he has such high armor. In a way where it's like you didn't really need 4.25 armor growth. Now, again, he already had 104 armor anyway. It's not like this is changing. The designer's just trying to nerf Hecarim, right? And nerfing him somewhat early game to 32 armor, which is a fairly reasonable armor level. I mean, 36 is also fairly reasonable for melee champion, but whatever. Ultimately, again, 3% damage increase in the early game. Has very, very high durability stats, with the W being a self-heal as well. Especially when some of it was from healing. Again, he just had a very good tank kit, right? High armor, a bunch of bonus health during fights, 2 forms of crowd control, the E and the R. It's no wonder people were building Hecarim full tank because he had a kit that works as a full tank. But saying, hey, look, let's reshape towards fighter. He's obviously a heavy fighter, right? He's supposed to build Trinity Force and Sterix and Death Stance and Guardian Angel and things like this. Those are all durability items, right? It makes total sense. So, but yeah, huge dodge damage. So here is, because it includes his total AD, here is the minimum damage, down by 5 to 16%. Here's the max damage, down by 7 to 21%. This is honestly a pretty meaningful damage cut. I am surprised there's not an AD ratio buff here. The bonus AD ratio in this is like 0.5, I think. It's not... Then yeah, okay, it becomes 1.0 bonus AD, which is like pretty reasonable, but this probably could have gone a bit higher. I mean, ultimately, Tank Hecarim is obviously in every way worse. This is a nerf, this is a nerf, this is a nerf, and this is a nerf to Tank Hecarim. There's no way about it. Plus the Chem Tank nerf. Tank Hecarim is probably dead. Tank Hecarim is probably sub 50% win rate. Fighter Hecarim, this is a nerf, this is a nerf, this is a nerf, and this is eventually a buff at 2 items plus boots 2. Like, Fighter Hecarim might also just be dead. So yeah, they finally deleted Hecarim from pro play, and I am willing to bet Hecarim is not viable in solo queue anymore. That's my bet here. Now again, this is a small nerf. This is a small nerf. This is a pretty small nerf, but I think Hecarim is probably sub 50, at least for tank builds. Next up, Heimerdinger apparently just doing overall just too well in win rate. Yes, indeed, they're saying top, mid, and bot. That said, looking at Plat Plus, which is a pretty low sample, top lane Heimerdinger does not have an overperforming win rate. Mid Heimer has a very good win rate, plus 2.5%. Bot Heimerdinger is like plus 2% over sort of the mean champion. So, I mean, is performing overall pretty strong, yeah. And ultimately, look, sometimes, and I know people get confused with this in the internet, it's like, but he's not popular. Like, look, if he's OP, he's OP. Like, it's okay for Riot to just nerf OP champions, even if they're not popular. If they're OP, they're too strong. This is how it works. You don't, like, no one cares if you believe they're overpowered, if they're overpowered. Your perception is not relevant here. So ultimately, look, it's 0 to 30 off the max, well, 0 to 36 off the maximum rocket damage, 0 to 20 off of the initial rocket damage. So here's our Heimerdinger initial rocket. Here's the max rocket damage. Obviously, the percentage is going to be the same because they're using the same numbers to base each other off of. But yep, there's a damage difference. And Yep, fair enough. This is obviously what you max first, by the way, on Heimerdinger. Yep. He's going to lose a bit of win rate. He's still going to be above average in basically every role. Maybe not quite there in top, but probably fine. Next up, Jinx had a bug where her rocket splash was 2.0 instead of 1.75. Bit of a whoops there, but yeah, again, primary target damage was what it was. But yeah, Jinx had gained a lot of win rate recently. Obviously, they buffed her trap arm time, and I think some mana costs, and they buffed her rocket form range, which is all very useful and very good, and her rocket form attack speed is all very good. And then somewhere in there, when they reverted the health nerf, they're like, oops, she's critting for too much. She's just blowing up minions. Now, this, I believe, was only in the last 2 weeks. This didn't seem to exist 3 weeks ago, because I remember playing Jinx in 11.7 and not killing the secondary minions any faster. That said, maybe I wasn't really watching during crits. Maybe it was in there for longer. Either way, Jinx is overperforming. I didn't actually write the win rate down. This is the one champion I didn't write win rate for. But was the first or second best band in the game, at least for a Plat plus solo queue, because of her win rate / pick rate, combined together. Very worthy nerf. Obviously, with the bug fix, sure, of course. So good to see. Jinx, I think, is overall still going to be pretty good, though, and almost certainly worth playing. Next up is Kayn. So Kayn. So what's interesting is they're saying that Shadow Assassin Kayn has been overshadowing his darkened counterpart. So we're bringing that part of Kayn a bit stronger. Now, I don't have the best source of data here. I didn't log in and look at Riot internal data metrics, but I know that Riot is able to and specifically does have the ability to track what's the win rate of non-transform Kayn, the win rate of red transform Kayn, and the win rate of blue transform Kayn. Like they're individual champions basically. Obviously, non-transform Kayn is very low win rate because it's only speaky games. But so I know they can directly say, like, oh, red Kayn's win rate is sub 50 and blue Kayn's win rate is 51. Oh, okay, red Kayn needs a buff. That's pretty easy. That's pretty simple. It doesn't seem much of a problem. What's interesting is, without me looking at internal data, I can look at like public data and use mythics as the sort of measure for this, as the dummy variable. Instead of tracking red versus blue, it's tracking what mythic you bought. And Gore Drinker has the highest pick rate of any mythic, and it's about as high pick rate as the next 3 assassin mythics combined. So Red Kayn is getting play. The win rate also seems to be in line with the assassin mythics, and unlike the Hecarim example from earlier, fighter and assassin mythics have like kind of the same cost. So from what I could tell from public data, it didn't seem like Red Kayn needed the help. That said, Riot has better data than I do by looking at Lawlytics, so I trust that they actually have that there. Either way, this is a pretty meaningful buff of 65% total AD on the Q. The way Q works, it hits twice. It does some percentage of his total AD, and it does some percentage of his target's maximum health. And then that max health damage has another AD ratio on top of it. So here is Kayn's Q damage using an example, sort of average champion. And for some reason, I don't have the ratio change, and I'm not sure why. I don't know why. I used to have it here, I'm pretty sure, but it's gone now. Basically, Kayn's AD ratio on the percent health damage on Q is like really good. It's something like 125 bonus AD or something, like it doubles the percent health damage. Like it's really, 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 really good. I forget exactly, but anyway, yeah, Red Kayn has very, very generous AD ratios, which, doesn't have that good of escapes and, does have to kind of sit in melee range to fight. Obviously, yeah, he has, some tools, but this is a pretty big buff. Honestly, yeah, this is a big deal of Red Kayn. Red Kayn should be very strong next patch. So if you want some wins, probably play Red Kayn. Next up is Kindred, who is not doing so hot in the jungle. Now, what's interesting is Kindred is actually doing really, at least pretty well in bottom lane. Jungle winner for Kindred is not doing great, so it does need the help. It's about 1.5% below maybe average, so could use a pretty sizable buff for jungle. But looking at the most recent patch, even over the last 30 days, bot lane Kindred is doing pretty well. Not like a top pick. I'm not saying like go learn this now. Like you should go learn like Swain or Karthus or something, or Tank Senna, but Kindred is a pretty decent bot lane pick overall. Now, anyway, here we go. We have a 0 to 20 base damage increase on the Q, a cooldown decrease on the Q for any time where you're not in the W zone, either when you cast it or you land in it by the time you're done casting it. But we can do the damage pretty easily. It's 40% more damage pretty early on in the game. That's not too bad. That's pretty good. That's going to help wave clear. It's going to help clear speed. Overall, pretty solid stuff. As far as Jungle Kindred, yeah, this should be a pretty nominal buff. Anything that helps clear speed is a pretty big deal. Clears from level 4 onwards. Those are going to matter. The 5 damage per monster you hit, that can save you an auto attack sometimes. It's going to be a fairly meaningful deal. You don't always have your W open. You're using Q to dance around and do stuff. So yeah, pretty solid stuff. Alrighty, so next up, we have Kog'Maw. Now, Kog'Maw, I've seen some lamentation, and maybe reasonably so, that Kog'Maw is already pretty good and doesn't need the help. So Kog'Maw is like 0.5, 0.7% win rate over mean for his solo queue win rate, which means he's doing pretty well overall in bot lane. And actually in mid lane, he's even slightly better in mid. So Kog'Maw is a completely viable mid laner and bot laner right now. And they're buffing Kog'Maw a little bit even still. I think ultimately, again, putting a decent champion more into the pro limelight. Again, not saying he really needs it, but that's what they're doing. So here's 5% increased armor MR reduction on the Q. By the way, it's an ability you max first if you're AD carry cog. And then here's 20 mana cost off Void Ooze, which if you're mid cog, you'd max that one first. But 20 flat mana is 20 flat mana regardless. So here is the shred. This is using basically average champion armor and average champion magic resist as our example targets. We'll add a decimal because the numbers aren't changing very much. So yeah, assuming you land, an early game Q on someone early into the game. Yeah, it's like a, 1.5-ish% DPS increase. Now, 1.5% more damage to the target that you've hit Q on for 4 seconds is not exactly a gigantic buff. Now, your teammates can also receive the 1.5% damage buff, which does matter. Once we've maxed it out and we're kind of around here, it's like 2.5, maybe closer to 3%. Now, of course, the more armor your target buys, the better off they get, right? So this can easily grow and grow and grow and grow and be more and more valuable, but it's not damage to absurdity, right? This is an increase of 3% more damage. They're going to be up to like 5% more damage, so it's not that gigantic. Yes, it's going to move the win rate. Yes, it's going to be like fairly effective. Damage is damage. It's useful, but this is not the sky is falling. Champs tend to have less MR growth over time, so your W on hit damage, your spell damage, all the magic damage stuff, like that stuff isn't getting multiplied by as much because people don't buy as much MR. So a lot of the damage is actually less than a 2% damage bump. Ultimately, yeah, it's still a buff. It still matters. Whatever. Here's the mana cost change. 25% less mana early game. If you're maxing it, it's 17% less damage, but for bot lane cog, it's a 1-point wonder until here, which means E is like actually reasonably castable. There is, honestly, I would say, a further incentive now to max E second as AD carry cog. I don't believe it'll overtake as correct, because keep in mind, Q has a rank up of bonus attack speed. I believe it's 5% per rank up after the first. And hey, still 2% more res shred is something. But, being that E is much more spammable now because the cost is not so prohibitive, there's a real argument to slapping more points into E for the bigger slow because you can now have it be a bigger part of the kit. There's a case to be made. It's probably still Q max second for AD carry cog, but it's a maybe. Next up is, and again, cogs are doing well, so if you want some wins, yeah, go play some cog. Lulu is doing just slightly well. She is just above baseline win rate. That said, Lulu is one of several champions making the mistake of buying Moonstone Renewer. Moonstone Renewer got nerfed incredibly heavily in the previous patch. In virtually every champion I looked at that was an enchanter, there was like 1 or 2 exceptions maybe. Moonstone was a far, far weaker buy than the previous patch. And was like several percent, like 3 to 5% lower win rate than a comparable support mythic. So like Lulu with Shurelya's is like 4 or 5% higher win rate than Lulu with Moonstone. Yeah, it's like a pretty big deal. Nami with Imperial Mandate is like a 3% higher win rate than Nami with Moonstone. It's like, so a lot of supports are actually just absurdly busted. Mostly with things like Shirelius, to be clear. Shirelius is maybe the strongest item in League right now, and if you want free wins, just play anyone who can buy Shirelius. That item is ridiculous, and just play enchanters because then you can like target your hastes on people and go win games for free. Really, just go do that. It's absurdly strong. So Lulu is actually, if you're buying like a real items, like a 54-55% winner champion, and needs to be nerfed. Her win rate is being suppressed very heavily by Moonstone. Once people learn, you got to start banning Lulu. If people haven't learned yet, just go play some Lulu and get some free wins like the champion's dumb. But ultimately, look, there's some very, very small buffs to Lulu. Now, these are buffs that really, I think, aren't going to change the win rate very much. Like, it's not really that big of a deal. Yeah, it matters some. Much like Kog'Maw, like, yes, it matters some. Like, it's going to move the needle, but this is not like, this doesn't take a like relatively balanced champion and make them giga busted. Lulu is already very strong and is going to be busted, but that's, that was already true. So here is W cooldown. You max this second, by the way. This is not going to change based on these changes here. But, pretty solid 6 to 8% cooldown buff. The attack speed gain is really not that big of a deal. This, by the way, is actually going to overstate the buff as well. Yes, 5% increased attack speed is indeed, a 4-ish% DPS gain. But the thing to consider is, in any given case, the person that you're buffing with this ability has their own attack speed, which means the actual gain, like if we do, like, let's just pretend they have like another 15% attack speed baseline, right? These champions normally have a bit more attack speed than before. It's like, yeah, it's actually not 4 point whatever. It's like, 3.7, 1 point whatever. So, and this, again, trends down. This would be like, plus 0.35 or something, right? And it's like, well, yeah, the buff is not maybe nearly as important. Either way, it is a buff. This does help for early skirmishing especially. It matters. Again, if you're whimsying for CC, it's not going to do this. The cooldown's always good, though. Yes, Lulu's very good. Lulu's OP. Play Lulu. Next up is Morgana Jungle, another one where I forgot to write the win rate down. Sorry about that, but Morgana Jungle is definitely doing far too well. So a nominal nerf to the damage to monsters. I believe the damage before the buff was 1.5x. It then became 2x. Now it's 1.85x. So most of the buff has been taken. Morgana was slightly weak to okay-ish as a jungler before. I assume they're trying to just fine-tune the damage to the point where Morgana is now fine. Like, this is now a reasonable win rate for Morgana. I think she's going to ultimately end up being slightly on the strong side. I think that's where Morgana's going to end up, is slightly on the strong side, but not this, like, incredibly important. I think Morgana might have been actually the most important ban in League of Legends because she was really high win rate in 3 roles. So good to see this going down. Good job. Next up, Rumble is getting a further nerf to the passive here. 5 to 10 flat on hit damage plus 0.05 on the AP ratio is going away. Now what's interesting is Rumble Jungle is a 2% win rate below normal. So Rumble Jungle is not outstanding. Rumble Top is about 1.7% win rate below normal, so not really outstanding either. And Rumble Mid is like 3% win rate above normal. So doing really, really, really well. I am surprised that this nerf is not trying to find further ways to specifically nerf mid Rumble. Now, it might be that exploration is difficult to do, and ultimately that's just not a real possibility here. That's spending the time on this, especially when it's like a pro-focused patch. You don't want to do like really big shakeup changes. You just want to, okay, Hecarim's obviously an example. Hecarim's getting nerfed, whatever. They're deleting him from the pro play. And they're just saying, okay, let's just like walk back some of the buffs. We know that in all cases, Rumble's passive is stronger than before. So an easy nerf to the passive is an easy way to say, look, we're just going to nerf Rumble down a bit of where he was before. So here's passive before and after, using a sort of average champion as the target. And indeed, 5 damage off in the early game is 5% off, and 10 damage off in the early game is 3% off. Of course, the AP ratio change is it's 5/6 of what it was, so 16%, 17%. The more AP you have, the bigger this nerf is. The more health they have, the bigger the nerf is. But either way, Punch and Rumble going to be slightly less strong. Next up is Set. Another champion where I forgot to write when it's down. My apologies. Fighter Set. So damage binding adjustments in 10/18, which is back before summer playoffs, I think, or Worlds, something like that. reduced his full tank builds, made him less of a menace in mid, jungle, and support. With the reduced threat of him flexing, we can now give him more damage because he's going to flex. Get it? He's strong. So yeah, this is doubling the AD ratio on the W, adding 20% AD ratio to the R. Cool beans. And I am kind of glad that Set is being pushed more and more towards fighter. Basically, Set just has 2 health bars, and the bigger that first health bar is, the more annoying that first health bar is, the more invincible he is. I played a game last night against a really fed Set. We won because I'm just the better jungler. And what it came down to was like, okay, we finally had our Xayah get to like 3 or 4 items, and like once we popped Sterix and forced Set to press W, we could then kill him afterwards. And if the guy had like another 200 armor, 200 MR, that wasn't going to happen. We were never going to even pop the Sterix or whatever, or, get that first shield off. So Set is definitely healthier when he's not actually, 2 tank health bars, but he's instead 2 fighter health bars. And that's like actually playable. So yeah, cool to see Set going in this way. Obviously, he was meant to be a fighter in the first place. So they're just trying to, fulfill the sort of fantasy of the champion in the first place. So cool beans there. Good job. I from what I can tell though, like fighter Set seems fine, so should be in a decent spot. Honestly, I'm pretty sure he's gonna be fine. Next up is Shen. So Shen top is doing very well. He's actually 1% win rate over normal, so he's already very, very strong. But again, here is a buff to put Shen into the limelight in pro play. He's really got almost no pro play presence whatsoever. So fair enough. So what does this mean? Well, the base shield is down by 35, 30, 25, but it has a 17.5% bonus health ratio on it, all of which gets multiplied when he's shielding a low health teammate. So here's the shield. It is in fact weaker, and here's how much health it takes to buff the shield. 200 bonus health in the first 8 levels can be a little tough. Obviously, once you have Balmy's Cinder, that's double Ruby Crystal, that's 300 health, bam, it's there. But if for some reason you don't have Balmy's by level 6, then hey, it's debatably a buff. But by level 11, you're damn right you have at least Ruby Crystal and some runes. So this is a definitive strict buff to Shen. The more farm he gets, keep in mind that the shield right minus 20, minus 35, minus 30, minus 25 technically. Ranking up the ultimate is also, the plus gotten there is slightly better as well. So, it slightly skews towards top Shen compared to, say, support Shen or maybe jungle Shen. But the big thing is the fact that it scales off of gold income, right? Certainly, yeah, you're going to get your relic shield or whatever. That's going to be, some health, like a couple hundred, and then you're going to get your chem tank or whatever. But top Shen is always going to have like that extra item on you beyond that. And so top Shen's shield is just going to be bigger. There's an argument to be made to kind of continue on this line that a level 9 support Shen with a chem tank comparing to a level 11 or 12 top Shen with a chem tank and a thorn mail, that the percentage difference in the shield is lower than pre-patch, right? Because rank 1 as rank 2 is literally double the shield value, right? Once you hit rank 2, you've literally doubled the shield, and so you have a really, really big deal when you're playing top Shen versus support Shen because you're going to have this breakpoint very, very often. But 140 plus, 300 to 400 bonus health versus 320 with 300 to 400 bonus health, like maybe, I'm not certain about this one, but maybe it's not quite double. So there's like an argument there that it's not quite so absurd, but anyway. Yeah, I mean, Shen is going to be in a very, very good spot. Shen top is going to be quite strong. Pretty easy spot for Elo. So next up, we have Taric. Taric Yi, the primary one. So Taric obviously has the interesting, dubious honor of being a 63% win rate mid laner, but only with Master Yi, which is like 95% of his games. Taric support is basically exactly an average champion. Maybe he's buying the wrong mythics here, but ultimately Taric support is overall not doing anything special over there. So Riot is buffing the Q mana cost by 0 to 20 based on rank. Maybe you consider putting more than 2 points into Q. If you only put 2 points into Q, it's a 5 mana cost change. It's not that big of a deal. Technically still a buff, but whatever. But the big thing is Cosmic Radiance no longer happens when the champion no longer exists on the map. So Master Yi's Alpha Strike, at least his Repel, things like that. It does not mean it breaks with Fizz, does not mean it breaks with Vlad, does not mean it breaks with, Xayah or anything like that. But if they disappear off the map, then they're gone. Then they're not shielded. They're not going to give anyone vulnerability. They're not going to stun. None of that's going to happen. So yeah, it is a strict, obvious nerf to the Taric Yi combo. You've gotta line it up. Yeah. So that is the hope that it nerfs Taric Yi as a combo. I actually went and looked to like double check that Taric wasn't just secretly a good mid laner, and so I looked at Taric's win rates with all junglers and just like looked at like the most common ones to get some sample. The Master Yi win rate is like 63%, and then you immediately go to like the next champion and it's like back to sub 50. None of them are high. Like it's just the Master Yi thing. So yeah, Taric mid's win rate is actually only good because of Master Yi. No one's surprised. By comparison, though, something like Ivern mid is actually just good and can be played. Even though the wave clear is kind of trash, it's okay. You just play it with kind of any jungler and you get stuff done. All right. As far as I can tell anyway, from what I looked at. So yeah, obviously there are some support interactions that's going to matter. There are some times you're playing just a fair, support Taric and a Master Yi got picked. But obviously there's other times where, this mana cost buff's going to be better and then you're happy. Alrighty, next up we have Trundle. Trundle jungle is pretty much fine. Trundle top is actually pretty good. Trundle top is above average win rate. Trundle jungle is very close to average win rate. Trundle is everyone's favorite champion to buff to the point where, Trundle has not had this high win rate in jungle in a really long time without being 100% pick ban in pro play. So we might be hitting the part where we start seeing jungle Trundle in pro all the time. I realize that the faster jungle camp spawns has kind of pushed us into a spot where, slow clearing junglers like Trundle are not really obliterating camps and can't keep up with like someone like Udyr and whatnot. But even though we are in an Udyr world, Trundle is doing more or less fine in the jungle. This buff of 12 to 0% increase slow and Pillar of Ice is going to be pretty meaningful. So, here's Taric Q cost, by the way, assuming you're maxing it. You're putting 2 points in right here, and then finishing out maxing it second at 10 plus. This probably should be green and not red. Not like it really matters, but here we go. Look at us, it's beautiful. Look at this buff on Taric. Cool beans. But yeah, so Trundle slow is quite a bit better. You sort of already maxed E last. You're even more incentivized to max it last now since rank 1 of the ability is much stronger. And this is how much total move speed your target has before compared to after. So basically, although the slow is increased by 12%, the target moves 15% slower because of how math works. So pretty meaningful sort of increase to the slow there. Pretty meaningful increase to the gank power. And honestly, yeah, this should be quite good. This is a very meaningful buff to having Trundle be a solid jangler. Trundle, Yasuo, I expect to see at least one game from Cloud9 here. We'll see if it happens. Next up is Vladdy Daddy. Definitely got buffed by a lot. In the previous patch, he gained 0 to 1 second off of his Q cooldown. That has been reverted to 0 to 0.4 seconds off the Q cooldown. So 60% of the buff was reverted. And indeed, this is just saying, okay, well, we wanted to buff Vladimir. We wanted to get him to be a good spot top lane. But we wanted him to be within reason in mid. He is not within reason in mid. He is a full big honkin' 3.6% or 3.7% over fair in mid lane. That's a bit much. In top lane, he's a 1.5% above balance, but that's fairly reasonable. But yeah, they're running this buff a lot to get top lane into like a balanced, a slightly weak state. And Vladimir mid was already pretty good pre-patch. Obviously got, a lot better off of this buff and is obviously still going to be quite strong. If you like winning, Vladimir is still a very good pick. Definitely can still play Vladimir. Go for it. Yeah, good champ for sure. Next up, we have Xerath. Now, Xerath is overall performing just fine as support, slightly above average, performing not quite outstanding in mid, playing just barely below average in mid, but overall, I mean, a reasonable pick to play, all things considered. So here is a 10 damage nerf on Volcano Pulse, compensated by, if you have 100 AP, it's as good, and the past 100 AP, it's better. This will hurt Xerath early. Obviously, his support for a while until he finishes almost his entire first mythic. I mean, similar for mid Xerath as well, to be clear, but mid lane farm is often going to be a little bit higher than support income until first item. And that's probably true. Anyway, you know, the more AP you get, the bigger this helps, the bigger this is. This is a very generous AP ratio, by the way, overall on Xerath Q. This, I mean, to the point where it's like a fairly non-standard AP ratio, where it takes less than 300 AP to double the damage his ability. And that is very aggressive. That is less than 300 AP to double the damage is very, very aggressive for a ratio. That is quite strong. It's very good. Yeah, it's real strong stuff. So, buy AP, survive as long as possible. Xerath, just live and scale. You are not a lane bully. You're not. You can maybe shove wave some. Your roams aren't outstanding, but you know you could ult from the red to like help your bot lane maybe. But just chill. You know, play your Xerath, scale up, and then just be an absolute menace late game. That's compensated, by the way, by a 0 to 20 flat damage add on the W, which is pretty meaningful. Obviously compensates this pretty well, but yeah, I mean, strict buffs to Xerath. Xerath's going to be just in a very, very good spot in both roles. Like, Xerath is a completely viable pick in mid support after the patch. If you want some wins, yeah, go play some of that. Here's Vlad's Q cooldown from a while back. Nothing too surprising there. Xerath Q damage, again, takes 100 AP to equalize. 271 is the AP required to double the damage of the ability now. Xerath W damage, again, takes a little bit to get there, but yeah, quite nice. This is if you maxed it first, by the way, which you probably won't. But if you did, if you maxed it second, then it takes till level 8 to get any better, but moving on. Alrighty, so there are 4 items getting changed. The first is Dead Man's Plate, losing 100 health. So reinforcing that the point of Dead Man's Plate is indeed the mobility, not the durability. Basically, this 720 right here is the gold value of just 60 flat move speed. Now, to be fair, obviously this move speed gets discharged once you attack someone, but it's also not it's not out of combat move speed like Moby's, because you can't like throw Tormented Soil and turn off the Shipwrecker move speed, right? Udyr still runs at full speed the entire time. There's also, you know, the free damage on hit, which I think still exists. There's the slow on hit, which obviously if you're Udyr with your E, that doesn't matter, but you know, sometimes it's still going to happen. Sometimes Chem Tank's not up. Sometimes you still find yourself getting the slow. It's, you know, still there. But ultimately, you know, yeah, arguably this item is not gold efficient, but move speed is scarce. So sometimes you're willing to take, you know, a expensive stat line for it. Obviously, after the nerf, it is, you know, really looking like it's not gold efficient. But honestly, we're at a point where, I mean, realistically, every jungler's built Dead Man second every time. Because the way it's basically working is with kind of all tank items, you're not getting 100% gold efficiency on stats, which I think is intentional, and I think fine, honestly. Tanks are clearly viable. Tank builds are clearly viable. It's Hecarim's best build, for example. So you're not getting 100% gold efficiency on stats. You are paying for your special, unique passive. And clearly, paying 800 gold for Shipwrecker was completely reasonable, and literally everyone did it. Everyone built Dead Man's Plate. Actually, everyone did it, right? So clearly the item is quite strong. So now it's like, okay, well, are you going to pay 1100 gold for the Dead Man's passive? And that's going to be a bit more of a consideration. Because ultimately, like, I saw a Reddit thread a few days ago, like, what's the point of tank items? XD is only 300 health. It's like, yeah, the point of tank items is that you get 600 gold of armor and health. Like, tank items should be having both of these stats. And in my opinion, in roughly equal costs. Like, I think 300 armor, let's say 300 health, 40 armor is a pretty good stat line. I actually am a big fan of items generally having an equal gold value of both. I think that is a reasonable spot to put items so that they feel like simultaneously targeted, such that like if they built against a Renekton and you're a mage, you can feel good about it that they're only getting half value out of their items. Like that feels good, at least on the offensive side. But also not a Thornmail case where it's 200 health and like 70 armor, where it just does nothing against mages. So, I am actually a huge fan of exactly this line of the stat profile. And I really, 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 really believe all tank items should try really hard to keep this. That half of their tank budget should be in health. Now, the rest of the item is in move speed, and that's fine, right? Half this item is a tank item, right? 1600 gold of tank stats for a 3000 gold item. The other half is in other stuff. That's reasonable to me. Like that feels like about the right design for tank items. Now, there's probably more room to move around here. You've got things like Randuin's running around and Frozen Heart and Thornmail where they're doing other things that are important as well. And it's probably hard to find 1500 gold worth of thorns feeling good, where it's not hard to make 1500 gold worth of move speed feel good. But anyway, I'm actually pretty okay with the Dead Man's Play stat profile. I think it's pretty reasonable. And let's move on a little bit. Okay. Death's Dance is getting 5 attack damage and 5 armor. So this is basically non-tank items. Non-tank items, I think, are actually very interestingly designed in that they never have both of these stats. They only ever have one or the other, right? You've got Guardian Angel and Death's Dance and Steric's Gauge. Ma, kind of, but that shield is, I would argue, very specific. And is really the only example of its kind. Wit's End is just MR. Like, I'm actually a big fan, right? Like, tanks give you both so that no matter what you're doing, you're always, like, targeting one role and generically durable. And with fighter items, you are only ever generically durable or targeting one role. And it's one of the interesting weaknesses of fighter itemization is you become increasingly open to percent health damage because you're not Death's Dance first. You're almost never Wit's End first. You're like, well, here's my Black Cleaver. Here's my Steric's Gauge. Here's my Titanic Hydra. Here's my Stride Breaker or Gore Drinker or whatever. Like, I'm a really, really big fan of fighter items only ever giving one kind of durability. I think that is actually really good. I'm a fan of that. Because it means you have the natural conversion over to Death's Dance to like solidify your build in one direction. Yes, Ma and Steric's have a weird conflict here where, oh yeah, and then I guess there's also Silvermere Dawn, which is also its own thing. That's the one that maybe, for the most part, fighter items do this, and I like it. There are couple of cases that I don't know, they could maybe at some point find a ratio, but it's not that important. Ultimately, look, Death's Dance, you are only paying 200 gold for Ignore Pain and Defy, but unfortunately or ultimately or whatever, this wasn't that better of stats than Guardian Angel, and Guardian Angel was like a more reliable way to just like dive in there on Lee Sin and not get killed at the start of the fight. Because GA effectively overwrites the damage, right? You get overkilled, and then 2 seconds later, 3 seconds later, whatever, you come back with 30% of your health, and you're going to be okay. So you can go in, go for your Lee Sin kick flash, you GA pop. They've killed the Kaisa by the time you're back alive, and they've advanced up to your body, and you can jump out. This doesn't really happen, reliably with a Death's Dance, where, yeah, you do die 1/3 slower to physical damage, sort of. But like the Vhagar is still gonna one-shot you, and so what are you really getting out of that? So Death's Dance actually lining up to be like, oh look, Guardian Angel is definitely the one where like I dive in and I sacrifice my item active or my item cooldown for a kill, and that's okay. That's my champion. Death's Dance is now like, no. It's stat efficient and has Ignore Pain Defy. Like this is, I know I've talked before about item consistency. And like, whoa, why don't you try to balance Death's Dance and like, I've never said this, by the way, but like, if you're going to like apply those words to everything, it's like, well, I'm a fan of how mythics are really consistent in their stat profiles. I think it's actually really, really good because you're comparing passives there. I like that Guardian Angel's essential active is so powerful. It's like, okay, the direct competition with Guardian Angel, which is Death's Dance, like the GA active is so good, Death's Dance just has more stats, but an arguably weaker not die like suite. Like, I think that's completely fine, completely reasonable, completely cool. I mean, it's how AD carry methods actually work, right? Where Dragon Slayer has more damage stats than Shield Bow. That's okay. Shield Bow has a shield on it. Even though the attack damage and attack speed is lower, that's okay. So Death Dance in a pretty cool spot. Again, it is now completely stat efficient as a source of stats that fighters care about. This is basically valuing Ignore Pain as 35 armor. I'm making up numbers here. It can mean literally nothing. It can be very good. This is valuing 30% move speed at face value, which is not realistic in any way at all, but like theoretically, in sort of optimal cases, this item's worth like 2,000-ish more gold of stuff, kind of. Yeah, Death Dance, I think, somewhat deserving of the buff. It just has never really quite lined up and been worthwhile, so I think it's cool to see this one coming through. Moonstone Renewer is absolute trash on almost every enchanter. There are a couple of champions where it's okay. I forget the ones where it's good, but there aren't many. I spot checked several enchanters and I could only really find one. I think it might have been Soraka. And I think that was it. And it's actually because it's very easy for Soraka to like press Q every 2 seconds in a team fight and thus get Moonstone value. It actually kind of lined up. But a lot of other champions don't really have exactly the same cadence with Moonstone, so it's really just not as good as you might think. Ultimately, Moonstone should not be bought on almost anyone. Just get that out of there. Yeah, this buff obviously helps, but it's not good enough yet, I don't think. Prowler's Claw now has very beneficial targeting. It now looks for the, if you're clicking on someone, if you're clicking near someone. I'm a fan of this. I'm a fan of big usability upgrades. I think it's actually really, really nice. So cool stuff there. It's probably going to be a nominal win rate increase for Prowler's Claw builds, so look for that. Might be that, this item was betraying you because it was hard to use. Whereas, Duskblade and Eclipse and all those items automatically worked. Yeah, we'll see. I am, by the way, a pretty big fan of non-active actives, like things like New Ruin King and Phantom Dancer, and I mean, even this one with Moonstone Renewer, like Frostfire Gauntlet. Like, I'm a really big fan of the like passes with a cooldown. So like it still does a specific thing, but you can't fail to use it entirely. Like I'm a really big fan of that, of interesting, unique passes that really shape the game without them having to be active buttons. I'm a really big fan. I don't think there's like a good way to have Prowler's Claw be that. It just will always be a somewhat difficult to use item because it does have an active on it, but cool stuff regardless. Sunfire now does a proper 1.5x to monsters that it kind of lost from Balmy Cinder. Now, it might in fact be that Sunfire... Sunfire is unique in this benefit. I mean, to be fair, like there's no junglers who actually build real Sunfire. That could be cleaned up over time, I suppose. Whatever, cool change. Yeah, small chance we see more junglers build Sunfire. Sure, no one's doing it right now, so I'm a fan. Turbo Chem Tank, meaningful nerf, finally losing 20% more bonus move speed. I think it used to be 75 at first blush, and then they lowered it to 60 and gave it bigger slow. Now it's 40% bonus move speed. That is still a lot of slow, or that is still a lot of move speed, right? 40% is still quite good. I also want to point out, this is not as big of a nerf as you might think, because pretty much ubiquitously, if you've popped Chem Tank, you are running into diminishing returns on movement speed, which means you weren't really getting the full 60% anyway. You're getting, I don't know, making up a number, 42% or something. And so instead of 40, you're getting like 33% because you're not hitting the diminishing returns yet, right? So, 60 to 40 is a pretty big deal, but, 42 to 33 is not as big of a deal. I'm pretty sure that math lines up. So it's not as big of a nerf as it looks like on paper. But that said, the pass-fail of do you reach your target in time is relevant. So something to watch out for sure. Yeah, pretty meaningful nerf to Chem Tank, obviously. Keep in mind, though, back with, we were talking about Hecarim before, Trinity Force was not terribly behind Chem Tank as a viable option. So most champs are going to have pretty good fallback patterns and fallback options overall. And then finally, we have Wit's End getting a flat 10 AD on top. It is a pretty niche item. Honestly, 30 AD is just too low for realistically any fighter item. I don't think you're really allowed to have 30 AD on a fighter item. That's just too low for an item slot. That should just like be a rule almost. But you can see the item was not gold efficient. Obviously, the on-hit damage is very, very good, though. Assuming you bought the item by level 9, you could value 45 on-hit damage at 1100 gold. That said, it can be hard for, let's say, a Darius or... actually, not that hard for a set, but like, how many autos are you really getting? Obviously, for someone like Aurelia, they're going to get these auto attacks off a lot or whatever. But this item is now good enough with this kind of efficiency that this item feels buyable on range champions. Like, this feels totally reasonable as an MR option pick your champion, right? This feels totally reasonable. 3,300 gold of efficient AD, attack speed, and MR all feel fine. The bond hit damage feels really good. Wit's End, I think, should probably enter the meta here. 10 AD is a meaningful buff to an item. This is going to be really, really good. I want to mention another time this happened a while ago. Now, it's not apples to apples, but it's okay. It's apples to oranges, and we can certainly compare fruit. So, in 2019? 18? A few years ago, Riot made a big change to Blade of the Ruined King. It went from 25 AD, 40 attack speed, to 40 AD, 25 attack speed. Now, with that, the item got 100 gold cheaper, and the lifesteal got buffed from, I think, 12 to 15%. However, maybe it was 10 to 15, I don't remember. However, the active lost its heal, and it lost its percent health damage. It was instead of flat 100. So the active got massively weaker, but it got more AD, more lifesteal, and of course a bit cheaper. So there's actually a lot of changes that went on here. But that single change of it being a more efficient source of AD, despite almost everything else, like the overall healing of the item going down and everything else, debatable, I guess, a little bit. But that item becoming an efficient source of attack damage was completely meta warping. It suddenly meant Lucian went from like a 49% win rate champion to a 52% win rate champion. Suddenly everyone played casters who kind of liked auto-attacking. It was huge for the Aurelias Renekton's of the world. It was huge for Lucian and any other champion like this. Suddenly Blade of the Ruined King completely, and I'm not exaggerating, completely took over League of Legends. It was entirely meta warping. Now, I don't think this Wit's End change is that big. Like, this is not the Blade of the Ruined King change from 3 years ago. But I don't want to completely undersell the fact that, like, having good AD attack speed items is a really, really big deal. To the point where, look, we might be back to fighters buying Wit's End and beating up mages in mid lane because it's just an efficient source of all the stats they care about. Like, this is a huge Aurelia mid buff to just beat Azir. I don't know if Aurelia can beat Azir. I don't really know. But, like, this is the kind of thing that, like, in 4 months, someone's going to be like, XD, remember when Riot buffed Wit's End? And we're going to watch MSI with Xerath Aurelia games and been like, yeah, remember when Riot buffed Wit's End? That's the kind of thing that might happen here. I'm not saying it's going to happen here. It's the kind of thing that might happen here. This is not a trivial buff. Improve the dropdown for item sets. That's awesome. Elixirs now display a cooldown on the quick buy panel so you can tell when they're available to you. That's kind of nice. Because they are available like, I don't know, minute 13 or something. I forget exactly. Apparently, didn't know that Mythics could be in the... Oh yeah, Mythics are just going to be gone from the builds menu. That's going to be nice. Orders are displayed in your shop if you have a great one. Oh, that's cute. Your shop shows Ord Mythics. That's kind of cool. Splits 2 is starting soon. Gwen icons. Nice. I'm Plat 1 and Flex. I haven't played much solo queue yet. Maybe we'll get Diamond before the ends. Probably not, though. Clash coming up soon. Big hype. Get ready for that. That's going to be exciting. And then there's an MSI Clash, which is going to be the May 8th and 9th. That's going to be... I mean, I'm at the very least staying up to watch MSI, so or waking up early to watch MSI, so we'll see how that goes. We'll see if I'm sleep deprived or not playing Clash. We'll see how it goes. Because Tier 1 Clash is late in the day, and MSI is early in the day for North America, so we'll see what happens. We'll see if it's even possible for me to even do any of this. Just because I'll be watching for sure, right? Like I'll be up early in the morning, getting those games into my brain. All right, bug fixes and stuff. Viego with passives, Glad Viego and stuff. All right, these aren't too important. We're going to move on. All right. We have managed to go, again, 1 hour in the patch rundown. Where did the time go? This went faster than I thought it would. I really didn't think it was going to be that long, but I guess we did have a lot of changes. Okay, so Diana is giga-busted in the mid lane and overall very strong in the jungle. These nerfs are mostly aimed at mid Diana, losing some base health regen and some armor growth, and mid Diana levels up more. Some attack speed loss, though, on the passive is going to mean that both going to be in much better spots overall. Diana jungle is still going to be slightly strong. Diana mid is still going to be slightly strong as well. Dr. Mundo is a busted top laner and a slightly strong jungler. Going to be pretty good in both roles after the patch. Garen is way too good in top, and apparently also way too good in mid. Pretty small nerf, though. He's still going to be high win rate, just less busted, but Garen's still very, very good. Gragas, right, is worried about a triple flex in pro play, so a 0-20 nerf to body slam is going to lower that somewhat. For solo queue, none of the Gragases are strong. Gragas jungle is the closest, and honestly not that great. Hecarim is pretty freaking screwed. This is a nerf until level 18, so it's a strict nerf. This is a nerf until 100 AD. Bonus AD, not total AD. So, jungle clear speed nerf, top lane, early dueling nerf, eventual late game damage buff, but not that big. W change is a strict nerf because you are going to receive a lot of ally healing, otherwise that's been cut by half. So, this is a pretty big nerf, and devastating charge's burst damage is a pretty big nerf. So, Hecarim is getting really, really hit hard. He is probably sub 50% win rate post patch. Goodbye, Hecarim. Also, of course, they're trying to shift him into playing a more attack damage focused build with all these bigger AD ratios. I think that's commendable and a good idea. Certainly, the Trinity Force builds were right behind. The Chem Tank builds were almost as viable. They're not quite as good. That said, these nerfs are so big, I don't think Hecarim's going to be strong post-patch. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. Heimerdinger, a bit strong overall. 320 damage off the rockets. Okay. Still going to be a bit strong. Jinx had a bug where her crit splash with rockets would hit the secondary targets for too much damage. That's going down. Jinx is overall one of the very best champions in the game. Will still be overall quite strong. Kayn. I didn't think was doing that poorly, but apparently is doing slightly weak as Red Kayn, so a small buff here. Fair enough. Kindred, weak in the jungle, seems to be pretty decent in bot lane, so stay tuned for bot Kindred being a real thing. But this is a pretty meaningful buff to Kindred. They should be in a good spot now. Kindred, I think, totally going to be viable. I think especially in bot lane. Kog'Maw already doing, honestly, pretty well. As far as I could tell, Kog'Maw is a pretty reasonable pick, all things considered. These buffs are not as big as you might think. The Voidoo's buff, though, is a very big deal to mid lane Kog'Maw. Mid lane Kog'Maw is actually already in a pretty good spot. So mid lane Kog, I think, it should be viable. Realistically, should be pro-viable. Certainly solo queue viable, though. And yeah, Kog could get some play. I mean, he's just going to be good. Like, you just play the champion. Lulu, also in a pretty good spot overall. Lulu's win rate doesn't look that good, but it's because she's buying Moonstone, and Moonstone is trash. If Lulu buys Shrelius, she is giga busted. Buy Shrelius on Lulu, receive free wins. Have fun. Morgana, too strong in the jungle after the changes, so walking back about 40% or so of the buff from the previous patch. Wise to do that. Morgana's still going to be a fairly strong jungler, though. Rumble, way too strong in mid. Not quite strong enough yet, although playable in jungle and top. Walking back some of the buff essentially from the previous patch to try to get Rumble out of Giga Busted out of mid. Reasonable choice. Okay. Next up is Set, buffing the AD ratios on his builds. Cool. Set seems fine. He's going to be pretty strong. I assume Set's actually doing pretty well, and these are just like buffing him to solid win rate territory because he's not a huge flex threat in pro anymore because he's not going to go like Chem tank Set as much. And of course, if you're playing, things like support Set, you're not getting much value out of these AD ratios anyway because, you've got your Rune Steels, Baldrins, and that's it. Pauldrons, whatever. Shen, realistically, pretty straightforward buff on the ultimate. We're going to show you the numbers here because they're actually useful for understanding it. Here we go. It takes 200 bonus HP, which is 2 Ruby Crystals or Ruby Crystal and a Doran Shield to buff the rank 1 ultimate. That is very likely. Essentially, Shen has a strictly stronger ult at all points in time, especially in the late game. This buff is not gigantic, but he's already strong in solo queue. He's going to be strong after this change as well. Pretty good spot. They're trying to get rid of Taric Yi in mid. You can no longer use your stuff effectively when champions disappear from the map, like during Master Yi's Alpha Strike. Big W, biggest W of the patch. Cool beans. Good job. Well done, Riot. And hey, Starlight's Touch, 5 mana cheaper, going to be kind of nice. Maxing Q second certainly can be a possibility, and with 20 mana cost off the max rank of the ability, seems much more reasonable to do. Trundle gets a 12% increase to his slow, which is actually like a 15% decrease in his target's movement speed when they're actually affected by it. Pretty big deal there. Trundle top is already pretty solid. Trundle jungle, completely viable. Definitely worth playing. Vladimir, giga busted in mid lane, so they're walking back. 60% of the buff from the previous patch was already pretty strong there, so Vlad will still be quite strong in mid. As far as top is concerned, he'll be fine. Overall, I think slightly strong. Xerath is a strong support and an okay mid laner. At 100 AP, Q is strictly buffed, and W is strictly buffed, so yeah, Xerath in a very good spot as a 2-row flex for mid support. Go play Xerath, it's going to be good. All right, that's it for the TLDR. Oh, wait, that's it. Sorry, there are items as well. Dead Man's Plate, you're now spending about, well, we can look at the numbers real quick. It's not going to be too hard. Dead Man's Plate, you're now paying 900 gold for the Shipwrecker passive, which, to be fair, yeah, people maybe are willing to spend that one. Death's Dance, 5 more AD, 5 more armor, is now a gold division item. That feels pretty good. Mincer Renewer is still trash. Prowler's Claw has better targeting. Sunfire Aegis now does more bonus damage to monsters. Turbo Chem Tank has less move speed, pretty big deal there as well. And Wit's End has 10 more AD, which makes it also a very efficient item as well. So Death's Dance and Wit's End have a lot more room to be built into fighters. Considering that normal fighter itemization has a lot of health on it, with things like Gore Drinker and maybe a Black Cleaver or a Asterix, which I know wants you to buy more health, but stay tuned. Yeah, having solid armor and MR purchases to go with your health stack is going to be a really valuable way to spend durability, like gold on durability for these fighters. Death's Dance and Wit's End should really be heavy considerations and look pretty good right now. So looking forward to that one. That's it for the patch rundown TLDR. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate y'all greatly. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.